There were things happening in my community that I didn't feel were optimal. I felt change needed to be made, and I looked around and I realised no one else was going to be willing to make that change. And I'm also a really big believer that you can't just come into a room with a problem. You must come in prepared to create a solution.
Last year I was speaking with a woman from the Wheatbelt. She works full time, she cares for kids, she drives long distance for the basics, and she keeps an eye on ageing parents, the usual regional juggle. Then all of a sudden she finds out that the school bus service for her children is ending. Suddenly she's an advocate. She's reading policy, writing emails, shifting timelines, finding allies, strategising. She didn't apply for this job, it landed on her kitchen table. Leadership in the regions often isn't a role, it is a response. A response that can be life-giving, but also exhausting. So today we're going to explore the good, the bad and the messy middle, the pride and pressure that comes with regional leadership, and the systemic shifts that would make it more sustainable. I'm with Sue Middleton, Tracy Lefroy, both experienced regional leaders. This conversation is supported by ANZ with Elizabeth Beech. So let's begin. So, Sue, in one sentence, the regional issue that first pushed you to step up.
So mine wasn't an issue. Well, mine was actually my father. So I grew up with, my dad was the local mayor, and I grew up with this extraordinary kind of demonstration of local leadership, and I just always, I think, wanted to follow that. And so I went into community development in rural communities at age 22 with a mission to make rural Australia prosperous.
That was a long sentence.
I know, but you have to get it right.
You get that.
Tracy, one sentence. When was it that you realised, oh, this is on me?
I think it was, for me, the moment when there were things happening in my community that I didn't feel were optimal. I felt change needed to be made, and I looked around and I realised no one else was going to be willing to make that change. And I'm also a really big believer that you can't just come into a room with a problem. You must come in prepared to create a solution. And for me, that's when I stepped onto local government and have gone from there.
All right. So, in regional communities, leadership often isn't optional. When you think about that expectation, what's the invisible cost and what unique strengths does it bring out in people?
For me, I think you don't realise the cost of leadership till you take the moment to step back. So for me, I've recently retired from 8 years in local government as Shire President in Moora, and it's only now that I'm looking into my own business and my own family and going, oh my gosh, there is a lot of stuff here that I've kind of dropped the ball on. And that's quite okay because I was doing important work and I feel that I was setting up some legacy for our community and also for our agricultural industry. But I think the hidden cost is the cost to your own business, your own enterprise and your own family. But that said, part of what I hope I have brought to local government leadership and to the industry roles I have will create legacy for my family and for future generations in the community of Moora and also within agriculture. So I guess you're weighing up the personal individual cost as opposed to the benefit that you're bringing across a spectrum of your community or industry.
It's always optional. Like, you can choose to say no, but there's things that choose you and you have to do them because you're the best person, your best place, and you've got the capability. And I'd give my recent example of being on the live export sheep panel. And I did that job because I got the phone calls and I realised that the government was serious and going to go ahead with it. And I felt there really needed to be a Western Australian person who understood farming on that panel. The cost, however, though, is it's a big cost. You'll pay a big price if you do a job that is as controversial and as unpopular a decision as that one. And I went into that with a really clear picture of what I wanted to achieve for the sheep industry in Western Australia. It's only just starting to happen now. So, it's like 2-3 years on, and the cost is personal relationships. The number of people who still don't and wouldn't engage with me because I did that role and they felt really personally offended and distressed and upset by the fact that I did that role. So, but the gain in that, though, is that people see you do big, tough things and you become really resilient. And you also have to really find a position around people's anger if you do really tough leadership positions, because you need to have enough empathy to understand them and know where they're coming from. So you get lots from it yourself personally, but you will pay a price.
It's quite a physical toll, isn't it?
It's emotionally incredibly difficult if you're an empathetic person, because so my experience was that, you're going into country halls with hundreds of people and a lot of people yelling at you and they're really angry at you, and you have to learn to be able to capture the information from a person who's really, right in the heart and depth of the grief cycle, and they're not going to come through that and get to acceptance and resolution for any time. It's going to take them ages to get there, and you've got to work with that because you need the information, and then you've got to translate it back to government to try and get an outcome and a solution for those people. And they're angry at you because they think you're the problem and they externalise the blame and you're the problem. You're not, but you've got to be able to work your way through that to be able to then deliver the solution. And that's not the easiest work you'll ever do in your life. So, but I feel like it's really important though, because if we don't have industry advocates who can hold the in-between spaces, we're always just going to be at the behest of decisions we don't like, yelling at the government and yelling at the corporations that do things we don't like, and there'll be no way forward.
And I think that was probably, for me, one of the biggest skills I've learnt in leadership or in advocacy or in policy is divorcing my own personality and my own emotion from someone's rejection of an idea or rejection of a concept. They're not rejecting me as a person, but they are rejecting a concept, live sheep export ban, some of the decisions we've made on Shire. And that's a really big challenge, especially in a small community and especially in a small industry where you are so visible. Everyone knows who you are. It's not like you can walk into the post office anonymously to get a stamp. Everyone has an opinion, has an idea, and quite often are coming to the table with only the problem without a solution. So for me, it was divorcing myself from people's anger about an issue. They're not angry at me. They are angry about an issue and what they perceive to be a lack of agency in influencing an outcome.
I think the other thing about it, like when you described it, is, you're trying to get people to understand this thing that they don't like. You're accessible as well. So you're not only, they can get you to you, they can get your phone number, they can get to your home, they can get to your car, they can get to your children, they can get to a whole range of things in your life that are precious. And you have to think about, like when the kids were younger, I didn't do things as controversial as I've done when I'm older because I'm now okay about the fact the kids are adults, they're in the ag industry, and they may still get blowback from anything that I'm involved in. But when they were younger, that concerned me because I wanted my family to be safe. And in ag, people are pretty robust about, when they don't like something, they're pretty robust, aren't they?
If someone else had stepped up during those times that you talked about, those experiences, how would your life have been different that year? Well, for you, Tracy, multiple
That's a
years.
loaded question.
It is.
That is a loaded question. It's a great question. And I think it's a really challenging one to answer because I don't know what the parallel reality would have been. Probably for me, something that I'm trying to grapple with at the moment as I sort of pivot a little bit in what my choices are is thinking about how you share leadership. So instead of necessarily substituting one person for another, how do you share the baton? And I think that comes about by introducing people to leadership early, giving them exposure, letting them make mistakes as well, not thinking everything has to be perfect. And I think that that's probably one of my own faults is that I do strive for everything to be perfect and for everyone to feel good about every decision, and it's not realistic.
Yeah.
So for me it would be about let's see how leadership looks when it's shared, when people are allowed to make mistakes, and when people are embraced for joining the conversation and joining the table.
So what about you not doing live export ban? Or do you think
someone
there's
else
no one
would
else?
have had to have done it,
Yeah.
right? And it was an awful gig.
Yeah.
So that would have just been like passing a really bad job to someone. It would have had to have been someone I didn't like, right? So here we go. You can have this one. But no, my life, how would it have been different? Probably, but the experience only helped me to grow. So, I think that I would if I looked back on it, I would say I'm really proud of what we achieved because we're starting to see the money hit the ground now, and this is going to change the sheep industry of Western Australia in really positive ways. But it was a terrible experience for people. If I could take away the terrible experience for people, if I could, if you had a way of making sure that the government would do these things in a way that gave people some agency over the actual decision, that would be my best outcome, I think. But I wouldn't take away me doing it and what I learnt in that process.
Tracy, I want to circle back to what you said about it's when you stop that you realise that there's been a cost. How do you rebuild that? How do you rebuild that with your family and your kids and your business, your partner?
So I've actively stepped back as of October last year, and unfortunately it coincided with a double fatality of 2 of our permanent staff on our farm. So I stepped back thinking I was stepping into space, and I stepped into really a crisis and a massive grief and support process. But for me as well, it's always that thing of if I have a pie and that pie is my time, there's only so many ways I can cut it up. And I think as well you need to sometimes understand that in the future, for me this year I've got a son in year 12, I am absolutely determined to have some capacity in there to support him if I can. So I don't regret any of the leadership positions that I've taken on. I've always acted with the best of intention for my community and for my industry. So I don't think it's about stepping it back. It's about understanding at this point in time, the most important place and the place where I can give the most value is here, and that's where I'm going to lean into, and that's where I'm going to devote my attention and effort to.
And creating a legacy.
Creating a legacy, I think you have to be a little bit careful that creating a legacy doesn't come from a place of ego, but rather comes from a place of how can I make this better? So an example for me was when I came into the Shire President role, a really challenging part was transitioning out a CEO who'd worked wonderfully, but perhaps we needed a refresh, and also putting in place boring things like processes. Sometimes processes are your legacy. Sometimes having a standard way of operating is your legacy. And that has no ego attached to it. Doing a massive building, that's your ego-based legacy. I think providing services and providing industry good or community good is a legacy that is without ego but has such immense value.
When you hear that story of a woman suddenly becoming a strategist and advocating to keep the school bus, what does it bring up for you personally? Have you had a moment where you became the person because no one else would?
Look, definitely. My example of probably equivalent of a school bus is childcare in Wongan Hills, and we had this moment where I was a chair of an organisation that had a building that wasn't suitable for childcare, and the cubby approached us and I said, well, what we actually need to do is build a childcare centre. And so we went into that process with the department saying that we weren't a large enough town, we didn't have enough scale to have a childcare centre, but we'd surveyed everyone, so we knew we could actually make this work. And we did. We built our own childcare centre and ran the service as a not-for-profit for 8 years before the local government took it over. And that was honestly that was like the moment where I didn't have children, I didn't have a childcare need. It was an economic development issue in our community. And I said, we're only going to solve this if we build a childcare centre, let's do it.
Who surprised you by showing up or not showing up to that?
It was actually
task?
Fascinating because so all the young mums who were engaged because they had young kids just became the most extraordinary fundraisers in our community because we kind of got the whole list of everyone and then broke it up between people, and we'd have a weekly meeting and people would come back and go, such and such is doing this for us and such is doing this for us. And so I just watched these young mums who were really there to try and do something for their own family, and their kids just blossom in this role of, doing something where they were really proud of what they were able to achieve. And then the other thing that was really great is that we then had another group, the development group, who built the building for us. The only reason we actually got it built was because it was a $460,000 building we built for. We had about $220,000 in cash. And you can't find if we had a building contractor, it still would never be built.
So really needed someone to start it. to start, putting it all into place.
Yeah.
And then you had the followers come.
I think it was just genuinely this moment where we had this meeting and they said, we want to be able to use your building. And we got them in there for 3 days a week. And I was like, you don't want this building. It's old. Like how this happens in rural communities. I was like, we can't even afford the maintenance. We're another community organisation. We can't even afford the maintenance on this building. You're not building, you cannot. This cannot be your childcare centre. This is a really important issue for this community. And I think it was just someone crystallising that they could do it and that helped them to overcome their fears and doubts and allowed them to be ambitious. And everyone was like, are you really serious we can build a childcare centre? I'm like, yeah, we can build anything. Because that is my experience, is that if you get the committed band of people together, that you can do anything. You can achieve anything in a community.
That's something that we discuss a bit at the RRR Network is apathy. Settling for that status quo of whatever that might be and not ever really putting your foot forward to make change. But it does rely on someone with those skills or that drive to possibly take that. And if you don't have that in a community, you're probably going to be stuck, do you think? Or is there enough drive in local communities?
There's always someone there, isn't there?
And I think that regional women in particular are really resilient, and I do find that term exhausting because I start to feel exhausted just thinking about being resilient again. But I think regional women are ready to dedicate themselves to a cause bigger than their individual needs. And that's the difference, is that we are ready to step in, we are ready to create community and service and essentially hope and vibrancy.
Do you think regional leadership, especially around children and community sustainability, is noticeably gendered?
Look, I think the care roles will largely fall to women. I think economic development activities in rural communities you'll see a lot more engagement from men in the community, and there is a gendered kind of a role division. But if you're talking about aged care, childcare, any of the services that are supporting children in the community, that will largely be women leaders there.
Where do men step in strongly then?
So certainly in my community of Wongan Hills, my experience was in the economic development roles. So they were there when we needed to build a phone tower because Telstra told us we were so far down the list of people who were going to get a phone tower. We went, okay, all right, we'll build our own and you can lease some space from it. And they were the group, the Wongan Ballagina Development Group. I think we built 33 or 35 houses over about 10 years, and that came from an initial amount of money that both the Shire and the Department of Housing gave us, but we were selling them for, the price that we were building them so we could continue building. That was very, very much a group of blokes in our community. If you looked at all the farming systems groups and the grower groups and things that are about farming innovation, that's definitely where I think there's a lot of men in that area as well. But then if I were to switch over and then say, who are the people behind any of the caring services, it's 100% women.
I think if we reframe things in terms of the Shire of Moora, we've built a new childcare centre, which has been phenomenal. But rather than framing it as a childcare or a caring role, I definitely see that as unlocking economic development, unlocking a massive workforce potential. And I think it's because we frame it as being a caring service and we do it ourselves rather than being, here's an economic development opportunity for our town. It leads to attraction and retention of staff. It means both parents in a relationship can work. It means children are receiving early intervention if there are any challenges for them. So it has a really multifaceted effect across the community, not just in childcare, but in your workforce as well.
Do you think that this pattern, this gendered advocacy pattern is shifting though, that you are seeing more men and women advocating for the childcare or women stepping in for the footy club support? And
yeah, look, I was really thrilled. So I'm part of the National Policy Group for Grain Growers, and we took on a couple of years ago a project all about childcare in regional areas. So, and in that we spoke about the fact that childcare doesn't need to be uniform, but it does need to be universal. So how does childcare look in a community the size of Moora? as opposed to how does childcare look in a town the size of Muckenbooten. So the model doesn't need to be the same, but the outcome of allowing parents to work and for children to have a safe space to be looked after, that's what you make your North Star, and then you figure it out from there.
Hearing this, it's interesting how there's a skill here both within you of this leadership. You know, you're talking about a community task, but it is a skill. And many women do complex advocacy, yet don't claim that leader label. Why do you think there's a tension between doing leadership and owning it? And what's the personal toll?
I think sometimes we only value roles that are paid. So often community leadership, industry advocacy are unpaid positions. So people assume if you're not being paid to do that job, you're clearly not contributing value, ergo you cannot be a leader.
I hear this from people that they're uncomfortable, and I think it's a little bit of imposter syndrome. So I think if you're leading any issue, you're a leader. But I find often, like in our work, people don't want to be referred to as leaders when I go, you're clearly leading. And I think it's a little bit about people not really seeing themselves clearly and understanding the value, that bit to your point, it's not paid, it's not valued, and they don't understand how much impact and difference they're making. And so you can't have the title if you don't feel like you're really worthy of the title, and they are.
What language or label do you prefer? You know, advocate, organiser, caregiver, community strategist, mum?
Oh, definitely. For me, advocacy is my least favourite role because I feel like advocacy's a long, hard path and you don't have control over it. You can only influence. You don't know whether you're ever going to get a result. I'd much prefer to be the entrepreneur. And the entrepreneur builds the project that solves the problem. Look, I don't come in with any great other ability. I just can really, I'm the person who can pull the team together and like bring the thing, you know, the project to the conclusion where, you know, it's there and it's on the ground and it solves the problem. So I'm more comfortable in kind of being the project developer or, you know, any of those names.
So if we get back to that leader label, do you think that avoiding it is also something to do with, I don't want to get any more jobs? I don't want them to come back to me because we're all calling me a leader.
I think when you are busy advocating, making policy, trying to fix systemic issues, you're so busy being called a leader is the least of your problems. But I also think you touched there, Kendall, on a piece around competency being a trap. And it's certainly something I am so devoted to my industry and to my community that I find it really challenging to say no. And so I find that people go, oh, Trace, you're really good at this. Would you mind just? And it's really challenging to step away from that. And it's again about how do I share that leadership so I'm not taking the whole burden. And I am really happy to mentor people, and that's something I find a real privilege, is helping other people step into that leadership space. But I think as well, part of being a leader is also being a connector. So Sue sort of referred to it a little bit in that quite often because you have what I refer to as a portfolio career, so there are lots of little bits that make up all the things I do in a week or a month or a year. And they are quite diverse and quite varied and use different networks. So if I can connect people across all those networks to make a solution that is going to work, then I feel really good about that. So I think sometimes being a leader isn't necessarily being out the front, but it's quietly being in the background, seeking a solution that's sustainable and that allows others to feel like they have agency and influence over how that solution looks.
Today's conversation is supported by ANZ. ANZ are proud to partner with organisations like the RRR Network, who support regional resilience and important conversations like today.
So if leadership in a regional town disappears for even a moment, what begins to erode first? Is it services, trust, identity, or something else?
I think it's all of the above. And whenever you have a vacuum in anything, quite often it can be filled by negativity. Yeah. And that worries me. So at the moment I'm working in the renewable energy space within our community and at the national level on a national leaders program. And what I find is that unfortunately there is a lack of information coming forward about planning and about projects, and that vacuum is being filled by misinformation and by people who love to whip up terror and fear, because nothing unites people like a common enemy. So if you can't provide information to people, someone else will, and that information is not always correct, nor is it necessarily always constructive and productive.
Can I add something? I think cohesion, because the division comes first. And all those other things you talked about also happen, but cohesion leaves first.
What's the hardest thing to rebuild though once it's gone?
The first thing that goes is trust, and trust is really challenging to build, and yet it can be destroyed so quickly. So you must guard the trust that people have in you with everything, because that is when they'll believe your message. That is when cohesion comes forward. Trust and transparency mean everything, particularly in regional communities where your identity flows through into everything that you do.
To add to the point about being able to keep trust, having a principles-based approach, because when you're going to be leading a thing that people don't like, what they attack you on is intent. And so if you can really clearly communicate the principles and where you're trying to head to, so the North Star, and then say, I know you're not liking this pathway, but you're going to need to work with me on the pathway because we've got to get to this. We agree on the direction. And that's what people normally agree on. They just don't agree on how you're going to get there.
And I think that would be something I talk about within agricultural advocacy, is that creating a common enemy by basically opposing every change under the sun. That's not constructive. It doesn't get you a seat at the decision-making table. The renewable energy example, I'm almost agnostic as to how that energy is generated. What I'm not agnostic about is landowner rights, neighbour rights and community benefit. So if I know that the things I'm trying to protect are landowner rights, neighbour rights and enhanced community, that gives me the North Star, which means everything else is just noise. So I know that I'm moving with integrity and also with purpose.
Being able to articulate that to everyone in the local community is really important as well.
It is. What's also really important is to sometimes when you feel that perhaps everyone is attacking you, which thank you, social media, it's actually tends to be a very, very small, noisy minority, and that you will find the silent majority are actually gently there supporting you in the background. And they'll be the people who call you after a meeting and say, hey, Trace, you had a rough time there, but well done, because there's no way I would stand up and say that and talk about supporting a community that is challenging you. And I think it's again about going, I know that I want our community to thrive. I know I want our industry to thrive, and I feel this is the best way forward. And sometimes just keeping in perspective that negative feedback's important, and it's really important to take that on, but it can also be the more vocal doesn't necessarily mean it's more supported.
When there's a change process, the same people will turn up every time and be the kind of negative Nellies, but they show you all the risks. So I'm grateful for the negative Nellies because I'm an optimist and I'm a Pollyanna and I see all the opportunities and I'm like, how can we go grab them? And I don't slow down to think about the risks. So when people come along and go, oh, you can't do that because we tried that and blah, 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 and you're like, oh, that's actually a really good risk. I didn't think about that. Thank you very much.
Let me have it.
Yeah, and they write your risk plan for you. So, like, everyone's got their role. And so, like, I also just don't have a problem with people being angry because I think it's a really valid response to change.
But dealing with the anger certainly has meant that you've probably built up a veneer over the years. Would that be right? It would be you got harder as it's gone on, every project, every task?
I'd actually say I'm more resilient. I'm not harder.
Yeah.
It still upsets me. I get really upset when I come out of a room where all the farmers are upset. That will just like churn in me for days. But that's because I understand and care about them and their behaviour I understand. So it's more that I have kind of like a deep empathy for what they're going through. That's what really, makes me makes me keep trying, and it makes, for me, I don't give up on the issue. I just keep going until I achieve it, or you just, you're so thoroughly blocked and too many barriers that you just go, well, we'll push that one aside for now.
And I think that as well comes back to divorcing yourself from the issue.
Mm-hmm.
So people yelling at me about someone else's dog getting out, very bad example, isn't about me. It's about their annoyance with the dog getting out. The other thing as well, when you're chairing a meeting or conducting a town hall meeting, you don't know what everyone else has had on during their day. So I think if you can try to remain open to whatever it is that they need to get off their chest, sometimes it's about something totally different. They might have had a fight with their spouse and they're cranky, and that crankiness comes out at you. So it's not – I think it's about getting perspective about why people are angry. But, gosh, don't think I don't lie awake at night at 3 a.m. replaying conversations over in my head going, oh, my goodness, how could I have done that differently? How could I have done that better? And it's all learning, and we're all human and we're all in it together. And I would like to think that every organisation I work on knows that I'm there 100% for the greater good. And if you have that trust in your peers and your colleagues and your community, then hopefully that builds trust, and it means that the people who are angry actually feel safe to be angry with you and safe to know you will try to find a solution.
Yeah.
How many people do you think are up at night worried about what was said to them? Is this a small group of leaders doing this?
Everyone,
I think it's a very human condition.
Yeah.
There are some individuals who I swear are like Teflon and nothing sticks. And I think, how do you do that? I am not Teflon. I'm more like cast iron that needs a scourer. But I think it shows I care about the issues and I care about people.
What I'm hearing is that passion and leadership are very much entwined, because that's what's driving you to act. You're speaking about the farmers earlier and how you felt that you had to do this.
I think the worst thing you could be was an apathetic, non-passionate leader. And that brings me to a thing I hold really dear to myself, and that's tenure limits. I do not think people should sit in the same role for too long, because you lose that fire and that passion. You perhaps become stale. You perhaps become hard and develop a shell, which isn't positive. And I think that sometimes in smaller communities or smaller industries, people stay in a seat because they assume no one will come forward for it. Someone will always come forward. It's what happens. So for me, after doing 8 years on Shire, I felt 2 terms was excellent. I had given a lot. I'd also learnt a lot, but it was time for someone else to have a turn and step into that leadership and have that exposure and that experience.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a 3x3. It takes you 3 years to learn it, 3 years you're performing in it, and then the last 3 years you need to be replacing yourself. Yeah. And you have, I've just become chair of a board that I love, and I've already told my replacement who is coming after me, because I want that person to be working with me, shadowing me, and us making decisions together. So, look, I'm 100% on the idea of, leadership is a shared endeavour, and the more you say to people, tap on the shoulder, I've spotted you, I can see your potential, and I want you to think about this organisation. It's actually really powerful to do that to people, and that's how I've got into all the things I have. Someone's tapped me on the shoulder and said, I think you'd be capable of this, and I've gone, great, fantastic. I'm going to have a crack at that. And there are young people in our communities looking for those pathways and those opportunities, and we hold them out by thinking we're the only ones that can do it.
How do you separate leader Sue and leader Tracy from mum, wife, daughter? And how do you develop that sort of barrier that when you are getting yelled at and you come home, that you don't take it out on your family, or there's a detriment to the business or anything like that?
You tell them a funny story. That's what I do. I kind of rely upon the, oh my God, the funniest thing happened today kind of thing for me, because you've got to break. You do need to have a break between what you've done during that day and your family. You can't take that energy back into, the people that you love and you care about. It's not fair on them. So I actually would say I also have separate wardrobes, weirdly, because I have the clothes that, I've been to a board meeting today, I've got my board meeting clothes on, and they're not the same. I'm going to go see my grandkids tonight and we've got a family get together because 2 of our girls are home. I am not planning to wear these clothes there. I will be going around in my casual clothes and I'm going to jump on the monkey bars and, play with the kids.
But it is hard with the work from home kind of structure for many regional women these days to make that switch as well.
So I would probably blur the lines a little bit more. And for me, I really stepped in. So I started my startup business when I was in hospital after giving birth to my 3rd child. So there's a blurring of the lines for you. And my kids have always seen what I'm doing and they've always seen what their dad's doing. We run a farm together. I've run a business off farm. I've held multiple leadership positions. Really, Eve, my youngest, has been coming to meetings and sitting on the floor eating fish and chips during meetings since she was about 3 years old. And I hope I'm role modelling for her that parents are leaders and parents are workers and that my husband and I are really in lockstep on being a team on this. And sometimes that means the kids have to maybe put up with sitting in a boring meeting and eating fish and chips. But it also means that I make really sure that if I've dedicated family time, that time does not get interrupted. Another thing I find really useful is what someone taught me called the 3rd space, and Dom McCoy explained this theory to me. And because I do a lot of driving, I find it really helpful. So I'll leave a meeting and let's say I've got a 40-minute drive. The first 20 minutes of that drive, I'm allowed to think about what's just happened in the room. So I'm allowed to be ruminating, making phone calls, sort of decompressing from that. The second half of the journey, I choose to get my head to where I'm going next. So if I'm going home to my family, I start thinking about my family and how excited I am to see them, or the fact that someone didn't make their bed this morning. And it's that 3rd space, so that intervening period between going from a professional role into a family role, and I make a very conscious decision to move into whichever space I'm heading into next.
So when a town's future is at stake, where should responsibility sit? Is it fair or sustainable that so much rests on unpaid community volunteers? And what must shift systematically?
I think that's a question as old as the age of time, Kendall. I think systemic failures that happen outside of regional areas depend so heavily on a local solution to fix them. And I don't think that that's sustainable. How do we fix that? We actually have regional people at the decision-making table meaningfully. We ensure that feedback is actually taken on board and looped back and closed. So nothing is more frustrating than feeling like you've ticked a box on consultation in that someone's come out, asked you a question, you answer it, and then they go on their merry way. So let's see how we feedback that loop, close that feedback loop so that if people are giving feedback, it's actually integrated into decision making. And I think we need to align ourselves more strategically with the way government operates. You know, we need to understand their priorities and how do we ensure that we're lined up with those so that they feel like their priorities are being heard whilst they're also servicing the needs and priorities of regional communities.
100%. There's never a time where regional voices can't be at the table, because if you're not at the table, your needs are not being considered.
Yep.
So someone has to be there. And that's an extra job. I understand that. But you are unfortunately in failing markets for the most part. And so it does mean that you've got to always be advocating for whatever the cause is or whatever you're trying to solve.
I'm hearing pride and exhaustion in the same breath. Do you sense growing fatigue, that feeling of, why is this always our job? Are the same women carrying the load year after year? And what happens when they step back?
Oh, gosh. I think there can be a tendency to look to the same people for solutions every time. And I understand that tendency, and I understand it's, again, that competency trap where if you've proven that you are good at affecting change and are good at influencing outcomes, then of course people are going to come to you. So perhaps it's on the current leaders to bring through the next crop of individuals who are able to follow in those footsteps. But I think when it becomes exhausting is when you feel you are working really hard and still feel like perhaps you're not having the influence you hoped you might. And I think as regional communities get smaller, and unfortunately we can see it across the nation and across the globe, that there are greater poles in opinions these days. I think we need to be careful as regional people that we don't polarise our views so far that there is no relationship between what's happening in metropolitan decision-making areas and what's happening in regional areas. And that only comes about, again, by someone having a seat at that decision-making table and explaining the context in which we live.
Yeah, and I also think it's important to distinguish fatigue from burnout in this question. So fatigue you will get over. You're tired, but you'll get over it, and that's a little break. Burnout's a bigger break. And burnout is actually when you get emotionally exhausted from carrying the load and there's too many stressors. And one of the things that can happen in rural communities is that you're also exposed, your business is exposed to climate and other things outside of your control, and you can be experiencing a lot of loss in a short amount of time. That compounds. So if you get to the stage where you're really demotivated and you're really feeling that sense of I don't even want to get out of bed, and you're feeling really exhausted, then that's actually, they're all red flags for something bigger's going on. So I'm a big advocate of you don't have to carry the load. You can also share the load, and it's important to know the difference between those two things, because if you're continuing to go on when you're burnt out, you will just get bitter and resentful, and you'll end up actually hating your community and hating the issues and hating yourself.
So how have you dealt with that situation? So how have you've identified that, and then you've gone, right, someone else is going to have to step in.
Yeah, 100%.
Who's going to do that?
And if it's a thing where you have to do it immediately, you have to ask people to help you. And the other thing I think women are great at doing is you're shouldering all of the load and you're not asking other people to help. So you really do need to pick up the phone and identify some people who can start to carry some of the load, and you need to take some time off. At that point, you have to step back from the issue. You're not saying I won't be back. You're not saying I don't care about this issue. You're just saying I'm toasted. And once you're toasted, you're actually doing damage anyway at that point.
What would make it easier for newcomers to step up?
Oh, look, everyone talks about pathways until we're blue in the face. But I think just genuinely knowing that you can make a difference to an emerging leader or a young person by saying, I've seen you. I think you're fantastic. I'd like you to consider coming through into whatever, say youth council or whatever it is, and really think strategically about growing the next generation. I do think, I'm probably, I think, a little bit older than all of us. I can say this. I'm fast approaching 60. For me, it's now all about I've got to think about legacy every day, because I will not be in these roles in the future. So if I'm not replacing myself and helping young people to come into the role after me, I've actually just not done my job. It's been ego,
100%
not
agree.
impact.
Yep.
If I were to do that.
So, you need exposure, you need capability, and you need sponsorship from someone else who's going to speak kindly about you when you're not in the room, the person who's got your back no matter what is going on. And I think that capability piece, there's some wonderful educational opportunities out there for emerging leaders. It's just knowing how to seek those out. And exposure is having an environment where being a leader doesn't mean you're not allowed to fail. So I think so often people see leadership as being about perfection, and it's certainly not. Leadership needs to be allowed to fail, to acknowledge their failure, and then move on.
And visibility would be my other answer to what really matters, because people aren't getting into the roles because they're not visible. When I won the Rural Woman of the Year, I got overwhelmed by the requests and people wanting to engage with me, and I genuinely had to quite quickly set up a system where I was hand-holding opportunities to other women who were ready to step up, but they weren't going to get that opportunity because I was the visible person. And I didn't actually realise that rural women were invisible until that happened to me. And then I went, oh my goodness, it's just that they don't know who to go to. And then they come to you and you're like,
Yep. Well, you
I
become
can't
well
do
known.
You do.
So everyone's like,
Yeah.
oh, Sue Middleton.
Yeah.
I know her. She's
Yeah.
great at public speaking. She is great at leading a team. She is great at advocating, at policy, at entrepreneurship. And you're amazing, but there's also a lot of other people who quietly may have those skills in the background. And it's something that I think Sue has been incredible at, is lifting up others. And that's an absolute leadership skill, and I think will be your legacy.
Thanks, Tracy, but I think you're amazing. And I do genuinely think, though, that whole process of saying, how can I support other women and not be the woman who's pulling down other women? And you've been a great support for me always, because it didn't matter what project I was on, I could ring you up.
Regional women are clearly leading on the ground, but is that translating into influence at higher decision-making levels? Councils, boards, state bodies, federal government. Are regions a training ground, or are they more of a place where women's leadership is relied on but not necessarily recognised?
It's definitely a training ground. So you can get to, if you want to, because you want to tackle an issue at a different scale, you can definitely go to the national scale from a regional or a local scale. You do need to do some other things, though. You can't just be really successful at a local level. So you're going to have to do, I call it the trading, it's kind of like you're influential at one level, but you have to go trade to someone who's at another level, because you've got to get the invite in. You've got to get through the door. And trading is a process of helping other people to get where they need to go, and you doing the same thing. So there are really specific actions you have to take if you want to go to another scale. But it doesn't mean working, and this I'm very, adamant about this, working at a national level does not mean you're going to have more influence than working at a local or a state level. So it's just, where does this problem need to get solved? And national work for me actually takes you away from the thing you probably care the most about as well. So there's a bigger price tag on national, I reckon. Maybe bigger impact at times.
I think from an industry perspective, I've loved what I've got to do at a national level, simply because I've felt I've had more impact. But you're dead right. If I'm in Canberra or Sydney, I'm quite far away from my farm at Bindi, and you need to choose, or for me, it was about choosing the opportunities where I felt I could have great impact if I was going to be having that time away from my business and away from my family. And I probably have not been quite as deliberate as Sue in my leadership journey, path, whatever you want to call it, in that some of the state and national roles that I've had have come as a result of what I've done locally, and it's led to a natural bridge. So I do some national policy work. I sit on a national leaders program. I'm lucky enough to work with the Energy Charter as part of their lived experiences panel. And I do feel there is an increasing value put on lived experience and how that translates in the policy arena.
And perhaps women can do really well in that space. They're able to gather that lived experience from others in their community and then translate that and share that to policy or to impact.
And I think that that's the key. So you've got your lived experience. You then need to figure out, how does that look on a national level so that it has applicability but is still contextualised. And I think that's probably where that skill comes in, is understanding how to take something granular, amplify it, and take it to a level that has applicability over a broader range.
Yeah, and there's this other skill that if you're going to go work at the national level, where you have to figure out how to make it land too, because you've really got to, like I call it, the speaking to the listening. You've got to figure out kind of what's their context as well, and then you have to present it in a way that's a value proposition for them. And that's we call it translating, but it's this massive skill. And you've talked about connecting, the bridging, and all of those things. Women are really good at that, because we're so used to reading a room and then figuring out what the room needs and providing all the emotional regulation and checking everyone's had a cup of tea and, looking after all of the other things that are going on in the in-between spaces. So I do think women end up in advocacy roles being super successful because they're doing all of that and landing everything they do really well. So if you were at a local level or another level, and you think, oh, I want to work at a national level, there will be a pathway. And it's about finding that pathway, either being intentional or, in Tracy's kind of example, just the visibility matters, that they can see you and then you'll get the request. Or I target things. Like, I'm on boards where I went out of my way to make sure people knew I wanted to be on that board. I talked to the board members. I figured out what the process was to get on it. I don't stalk people. It's not quite that bad, but it's not shy of stalking. And people, whenever I say this, they always say to me, what are you targeting next? I'm like, oh, well, you'll find out.
Watch out.
I'll be turning up there. Anyway, but jokes aside, if you want to be able to go and make a difference and have impact at that level, then make your plan, lay your plan out, and, go for it.
So what we're hearing is that the regions are a training ground for women. And there is possibility, real possibility to go national or to go local, or so is that what you feel, that you're seeing that happen, that regional women are stepping into leadership roles?
I think they're absolutely
everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah. And there's a statistic that gets bandied about, Kendall, and I think it's fantastic. And it's about kids who have grown up on a farm being overrepresented in the C-suite in companies globally. And I think it's that grounding and that ability to, when you live in a regional community, everything is interconnected. So you understand relationships, you understand causative effect, you understand how important it is that regardless of whether there's some perceived hierarchy, that everyone within that is comfortable and confident and engaged in what's happening. So I think regional women and regional people as a whole are absolutely fantastic leaders, and it is translating.
So what I'm hearing from the regions is that leadership is often born at a moment when something you love is at risk. And it asks of people, often women, to learn fast, negotiate hard, keep showing up. And while that builds extraordinary muscle in communities, it shouldn't rely on unpaid, invisible work to keep essential services alive. So the path forward, I think, seems clear, that we recognise advocacy as leadership, we share the workload, and we make better bridges to decision-making tables where local wisdom sets policy. It just doesn't band-aid crises.
That was the most beautiful summary.
So, Sue, Tracy, thank you for your honesty, your stamina and your vision. If today's conversation resonates, please share it with someone who's holding their town together. And thank you to ANZ and to Elizabeth Beech for supporting this conversation. It's really important that we get to have conversations like this. And thank you for listening. Until next time.